They say K2 doesn't kill you fast. It kills you slowly, one mistake, one breath, one step at a time. In May 2019, a British climber named Robin Fisher stood on top of the world. After years of dreaming, training, and near-death experiences, he had finally conquered K2, the savage mountain. For a brief moment, he believed he'd beaten the odds. But what Robin didn't know was that he was already dead. Because the moment you climb into K2's death zone, your body begins to die. Every cell, every heartbeat is fighting a losing battle. And Robin was about to discover that no summit photo, no glory, is worth the price the mountain demands. As he began his descent, a deadly traffic jam was forming below, a line of exhausted climbers stuck on a narrow ridge with no oxygen and nowhere to go. Robin had warned others that overcrowding on K2 could prove fatal. He was right. This is not just a story about a man who climbed K2. It's the story of how the mountain took him, slowly, silently, and in plain sight. Stay with K2 Stories, and let's uncover the haunting truth behind Robin Fisher's final climb. Robin Fisher wasn't supposed to die on K2, not after everything he'd survived. He was 44 years old, a father, a husband, and a man who had already stood on top of Mount Everest. For years he had chased the feeling of standing above the clouds, where the world goes silent and only the sound of your heartbeat reminds you you're still alive. But K2 was different. Everest is tall. K2 is lethal. Robin knew it. Everyone knew it. They called it the Savage Mountain for a reason, because 1 in every 4 climbers who reach its slopes never come back down. Yet for Robin, that was exactly the reason he wanted it. He had spent months training his body and mind, preparing for the one climb that could define his legacy. He wrote in his journal that he wanted to push his limits one last time, to see what's left of himself at the edge. And in May 2019, he finally arrived in Pakistan, base camp, elevation 5,000 meters. The wind cut through the valley like broken glass. The tents rattled. The ice groaned beneath the mountain's ancient weight. Around him, dozens of climbers gathered from every corner of the world, all chasing the same dream: to stand where almost no human has stood before. But Robin noticed something that unsettled him. There were too many people. For decades, K2 had remained untouched by mass expeditions. It was remote, technical, unforgiving, never crowded like Everest. But that year was different. Commercial guiding companies had started offering fixed ropes, bottled oxygen, and promises of success to anyone who could pay the price. And now at base camp, Robin saw it firsthand. More than 100 climbers preparing to climb K2 in the same week. He shook his head and told a fellow climber, "If this keeps up, someone's going to die, maybe more than one." No one wanted to hear it. The weather window looked perfect. The ropes were set. Everyone wanted to go. On the morning of May 22nd, Robin began his ascent with a small team. The sun had barely risen when they crossed Camp 2, where the snow glowed like crushed diamonds under a blood-red dawn. The higher they climbed, the thinner the air became. Every breath burned like fire. Every step demanded a piece of his soul. He moved with precision, methodical, focused. Other climbers were slower, some gasping, some stopping to rest, clogging the narrow paths. The trail to the summit was a single rope line. Only one person could move at a time. Above 8,000 meters, where oxygen is almost non-existent, waiting can be a death sentence. By Camp 4, Robin could already see it. A queue of climbers stretching across the bottleneck, the most dangerous section of the entire mountain, a funnel of ice beneath an unstable overhanging glacier. If that ice broke, everyone beneath would die instantly. He radioed his team leader, "We're too many up here. It's madness." But the message was drowned by static and wind. Everyone was focused on the same thing, the summit. That night, temperatures plunged below 30 degrees C. The wind howled like a living thing. Robin tucked his frozen hands into his downsuit and stared into the darkness above him. Somewhere up there, 86-11 meters high, was the dream he'd chased his entire life. And somewhere between that dream and the void below, waited his fate. As the clock struck midnight, Robin clipped onto the fixed line and began his final push toward the summit. Around him, dozens of headlamps flickered like stars in the night, one endless line of human ambition crawling up the savage mountain. He whispered to himself, one step, just one step more. He didn't know that the mountain was already taking something from him with each breath: oxygen, heat, strength, time. And soon, the very thing he had warned others about would seal his fate. The traffic jam on K2 was about to begin. The summit of K2, 8,611 meters above the sea, where the sky turns black even in daylight and every breath feels like inhaling through a straw. At 7:30 a.m. on May 24, 2019, Robin Fisher finally stood there. He had done it. The dream of a lifetime. Achieved. He looked around him and saw a sight few humans ever witness. The curve of the earth stretching endlessly, the shadow of K2 casting across the Karakoram range, and the sun bleeding orange light over a frozen kingdom of death. But he wasn't alone. Dozens of climbers were already there, some celebrating, some crying, others simply collapsing in silence. The narrow summit ridge was packed shoulder to shoulder. There was no room to rest, no room to breathe. Robin forced a smile for the camera, raised a small flag, and said softly through his oxygen mask, "For everyone who believed in me, this is for you." Then he turned to begin the descent. Because on K2, the summit is only halfway, and it's the way down that kills. As Robin unclipped from the summit ropes and began his descent toward Camp 4, he could see the line forming below, dozens of climbers stuck in a single file waiting to pass through the bottleneck, the most dangerous section on the mountain. It was exactly what he had feared: overcrowding. A thin blue line of oxygen tubes snaked down the ridge, tangled with climbers too weak to move, too cold to think. Every delay meant less oxygen, less daylight, less chance of survival. The radio crackled with voices, guides shouting instructions, climbers calling for help, confusion building. Somewhere below, someone had collapsed. The queue had stopped moving. Robin tried to stay calm. He knew panic was death up here. He adjusted his mask, checked his regulator, and looked down the slope. The wind was picking up again. Small snow flurries were turning into needles that cut into his face. He waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Still no movement. He could feel the oxygen in his bottle running low. His fingers were stiff, numb. His mind began to fade in and out. He looked up at the summit behind him. The sky was changing color, an eerie, metallic gray. "We need to move," he shouted down the line. "We'll freeze if we stay here." No one responded. Some were too far gone to care. So Robin made a decision. He unclipped from the line and began moving down slowly on his own, passing climbers one by one, whispering encouragement as he went. Some faces were covered in frost. Some didn't respond at all. Then, around 8,200 meters, he saw his teammate, Gabriel, motionless in the snow. Robin knelt beside him. "Gabriel, can you hear me?" Nothing. He checked his pulse. Weak, but still there. He pulled out his oxygen mask and tried to share his supply. "Breathe, mate, just breathe." But Gabriel's eyes were glassy, unfocused. He was slipping away. Robin stayed with him for several minutes, knowing each second meant less chance of saving himself. Then, with trembling hands, he whispered, "I'll send help from below. Hold on." He pushed forward. Below the bottleneck, the queue finally began to move, but slowly, agonizingly slow. The fixed ropes were jammed with climbers descending at different speeds, their crampons scraping sparks on the ice. The glacier above creaked like a living monster, threatening to break loose at any moment. By now, Robin's oxygen was nearly gone. His vision blurred. Every step felt like walking through a dream. The death zone does that. It makes you forget you're dying. He reached for a spare bottle clipped to his harness, but the valve was frozen solid. He beat it against the ice, desperate. Nothing. Then his body betrayed him. His legs buckled. The world spun. He dropped to his knees, gasping. "Not yet," he murmured. "Not like this." He forced himself up, stumbling forward, one shaky step at a time. He thought of his wife, his daughter, the promise he made to come home. He was only a few hundred meters from Camp 4. Safety, warmth, oxygen. But on K2, a few hundred meters can be an eternity. Behind him, the line of climbers stretched endlessly into the white void. Some would make it down. Some would never be seen again. And Robin Fisher, the man who warned that overcrowding could prove fatal, was now living out his own prophecy. He was dying on K2. He just didn't know it yet. At 8,000 meters, time doesn't flow normally. Minutes stretch into hours. Hours disappear into the wind. And death arrives quietly. Robin Fisher was now moving in slow motion, his body refusing to obey him. Each step felt like he was walking through water, the air too thin, his thoughts dissolving into static. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears, thump, 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 then silence. He stopped and looked around. The slope below him vanished into a white abyss. The wind was screaming again, ripping at his clothes, pulling at the ropes. He could see faint shadows ahead, other climbers, still descending. But they seemed impossibly far away. He tried to call out. His lips moved, but no sound came. He checked his oxygen gauge. Empty. The needle rested flat at 0. Robin unstrapped his mask and took one breath of the open air, if you can call it that. It felt like sucking knives into his lungs. His vision exploded with light, then darkness. He stumbled forward, his crampons scraping the ice, leaving uneven marks like a dying heartbeat on the slope. Somewhere behind him, a Sherpa guide shouted, "Robin, stay with us!" But the voice sounded far away, like it came from another world. Robin turned his head. He could see them, 3 climbers descending together, maybe 50 meters above. One of them was waving for him to stop, to wait. But Robin's mind was gone. The mountain had taken it. He wasn't climbing anymore. He was drifting. Memories began to flood his fading consciousness. His daughter's laughter, the smell of wet grass after a storm, his wife waving goodbye at Heathrow Airport. He smiled weakly inside his frost-covered mask. Then he fell. Not a dramatic tumble, not a long fall into the abyss, just a slow, heavy collapse into the snow. His knees buckled, his body folded, and he lay there, face down, motionless. The Sherpa team reached him minutes later. They rolled him over, patted his face, shouted his name. "Robin! Robin!" No response. They tried oxygen, tried shaking him awake, tried everything they could. But the look in his eyes told them the truth. The spark was gone. He wasn't dead yet, but he was already leaving. They carried him down a few meters, hoping to reach Camp 4, but K2 doesn't forgive the weak even for a moment. The terrain was steep, icy, cruel. The wind howled, as if mocking their efforts. After 40 minutes, they had to stop. One of the Sherpas whispered, "We can't go further, it's too dangerous." They laid Robin's body gently against the slope, his face toward the mountain he had loved more than anything. They said a short prayer, just a few words carried away by the wind, and began their descent. By the time they reached Camp 4, the news had spread through the radio network. "We've lost one. British climber. Fisher." Silence followed. No one was surprised. Everyone knew it could have been any of them. That night, the temperature dropped to 40 degrees. The mountain went quiet again. The snow filled Robin's footprints, erasing the evidence he was ever there. Back at base camp, climbers sat in their tents, staring at the floor, too numb to speak. Someone whispered, "He warned us. He told us this would happen." Another nodded, eyes wet with exhaustion. "Yeah, and he was right." Satellite phones rang in London that evening. A family thousands of miles away received the message no one ever wants to hear. There was an accident. He didn't make it. His wife couldn't speak. His daughter asked, "When's Daddy coming home?" And somewhere, high above the clouds, the mountain remained indifferent. Because K2 doesn't remember names, only footprints and bodies. The next morning, climbers passing through the same section saw a bright red jacket half buried in snow. Some stopped for a moment, whispered a quiet farewell. Others kept walking. They all knew that Robin's story wasn't unique. He was just the latest in a long line of climbers who had learned the same terrible truth. That on K2 you don't conquer the mountain. You bargain with it. And for Robin Fisher, the price was his life. The world didn't know Robin Fisher had died, not at first. The news from K2 takes time to travel, carried by radio static and whispers through frozen camps. But when it did, it hit like an avalanche. British climber dies on K2 after warning of overcrowding. The irony was impossible to ignore. Just days before his death, Robin had posted on social media, warning that the mountain was becoming dangerously congested. He had written, "Too many climbers, too little experience. This could prove fatal." And now, his own words had become his obituary. Back in the UK, the headlines were everywhere. His friends described him as fearless, methodical, deeply compassionate, the kind of man who never sought fame, only challenge. His wife, Joanna, released a short statement. He died doing what he loved, but the mountain he loved is no longer the mountain he dreamed of. That sentence broke hearts across the climbing community, because she was right. The K2 that Robin had imagined, raw, untouched, sacred, was gone. In its place stood a crowded ridge of ambition, chaos, and profit. Dozens of climbers lined up like tourists on a staircase to death. Bottled oxygen hissed, drones buzzed overhead, and commercial guides promised the impossible. For decades, K2 was considered too dangerous to commercialize. But 2019 changed that. Record numbers attempted the summit. Record numbers died. And Robin's death became the turning point, the story that forced people to look at what climbing had become. At base camp, his teammates gathered for a memorial. They placed a small stone cairn and tied a piece of red rope around it, the same color as the jacket he wore on his final climb. The wind sang through the valley as one climber whispered, "He was the most alive person I've ever known, and the mountain took him like it takes them all, without mercy." Days later, as helicopters carried survivors back to Skardu, others looked down at K2 from above and saw the thin, motionless figure still lying near the bottleneck, bright red against white. There was no way to bring him home. Retrieval on K2 is nearly impossible. The altitude, the terrain, the risk, all make it a graveyard that no one can reach. Robin would remain where he fell, like hundreds before him, frozen, preserved, part of the mountain now. Months passed. The climbing season ended. Snow buried the ropes, erased the tracks, and still, somewhere beneath it all, Robin lay waiting, silent testimony to everything he'd warned about. In the months that followed, the climbing world debated what had gone wrong. Was it greed? Poor planning? The human obsession with reaching the top at any cost? Some said it was destiny, that everyone who climbs K2 knows the odds. Others said it was negligence, that guiding companies had turned the world's most dangerous peak into a business. But no one could escape the truth. K2 hadn't changed. We had. Technology gave us the illusion of control: GPS, drones, weather forecasts, oxygen systems. But the mountain didn't care. It never has. A Sherpa who had been on the same expedition said later in an interview, "K2 is not a mountain you climb. It's a mountain that lets you live or not." Robin knew that. His words echoed across documentaries, articles, podcasts, each one repeating the same haunting message. Robin Fisher was not the first, and he won't be the last. Even now, every climber who passes through the bottleneck will see a small, faded red shape half buried in the snow. Some stop and whisper a prayer. Some look away. But all of them know his story. Because on K2, legends don't live forever. They freeze in place and stay behind as warnings for those who come next. And though the mountain forgets names, the wind remembers. They say when you die on K2, the mountain keeps you. And somewhere up there, frozen beneath the eternal snow, Robin Fisher still lies, eyes closed, body preserved, dream unfinished. To climbers who pass his resting place, he doesn't look dead. He looks like he's still catching his breath. There's a strange peace in that, and a brutal truth. Robin didn't die because he made a mistake. He died because we all did. Because humanity has hunger for the summit, for that one moment of glory, has blinded us to the cost. The line of climbers beneath the bottleneck wasn't a victory. It was a funeral procession. A parade of ambition marching straight into the death zone. Robin warned them. He said the crowding would prove fatal. He was right, not just for himself, but for what mountaineering had become. And yet, people still go. Every season, new names, new dreams, new bodies. The mountain never changes. It just waits. If you stand on K2 long enough, you'll hear the wind whisper through the ice, carrying the voices of those who never came back. You might even hear Robin's. Don't look at the summit, it says. Look at what it costs. Because sometimes reaching the top isn't the real victory. Sometimes survival is. And for those who never returned, like Robin Fisher, the mountain will remember them in silence. Frozen in time. Forever part of K2's story. If stories like this move you, if you believe some lives deserve to be remembered even when they end in tragedy, then don't let this one fade into the snow. Subscribe to K2 Stories. Because every climber has a story. And on this mountain, every story has a price.